Hello students, welcome to Darasa Online. My name is Idris Msuya. I'm here to give you a revision lesson in History Paper 2, and we are proceeding with our topic of the Rise of Socialism, which is of course topic 5. In the previous lesson, my dear students, we looked at development of socialist theory, the October Russian Revolution and its impact on world history. We also looked at the Chinese Communist Revolution of 1949 and its impact on world history. And also we looked at the fall or collapse of Soviet Union and the communist bloc. My dear students, this is what we looked last time, and it's my hope that you understood our lesson. And so you can go with me today to finish up this topic. Today we are going to look at another subtopic, which is in fact our last subtopic, and this is the Tanzania Socialist Experiment. Tanzania Socialist Experiment from 1967 to 1985. That means from the Arusha Declaration to 1985. My dear students, we have got some objectives to this subtopic. That means at the end of our subtopic of today, my dear students, you have to make sure that you have achieved the following objective. The first is discussing the essence of Arusha Declaration, the essence of Arusha Declaration. The second objective is analyzing ujamaa and self-reliance. And the third is evaluating the economic and political impact of Arusha Declaration in Tanzania. My dear students, at the end of our lesson of today, you have to make sure that you are able to achieve this specific objective, which I've just mentioned it to you, and the way you can see them here. My dear students, not only that, but also at the end of our lesson, you also have to make sure that you can attempt these two questions. The first question is analyze the objective of socialism and self-reliance in Tanzania. And the second question is evaluate the economic and political impact of Arusha Declaration in Tanzania by 1985. So it is my hope that by the time we finish our lesson of today, my dear students, you can be able to attempt these two questions. Of course, together with some other questions beside these two questions, which are related to this subtopic. My dear students, let's now go to Tanzania Socialist Experiment. Tanzania Socialist Experiment. What do we mean by Tanzania Socialist Experiment? My dear students, we are trying to look at Tanzania Socialist Experiment. That means we are trying to look at the time Tanzania started to practice socialism until 1985, when we officially abandoned that policy of socialism and in fact go back to a free market economy. My dear students, socialism was introduced in Tanzania in 1967 on the 5th of February, 1967 on the 5th of February during the Arusha Declaration. And it was outlined by Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, who was the first president of the United Republic of Tanzania. And the declaration outlined things like that first it gave out the policy of socialism and self-reliance. Socialism and self-reliance. But the second thing is that it also explained the, it also explained socialism or ujamaa, principles of ujamaa, as as the visions to develop the nation's economy. That it explained the principle of ujamaa, which is of course Mwalimu Nyerere's vision to develop the national economy. That national economy of Tanzania will be developed by using the policy of ujamaa. Policy of ujamaa. So ujamaa, in fact, became an ideology which is going to lead in the development of our national economy. But also, this Arusha Declaration also aimed at overhauling the Tanzanian economy, overhauling overhauling the Tanzanian economy. Overhaul, it means to change Tanzanian economy completely, to change the Tanzanian economic system completely through what was called the African socialism, Of course, we'll come to see in detail about this, but this is what we mean by the Arusha Declaration. So in short, my dear students, Tanzania socialist experiment, as I said, it started on the 5th of the 5th of February 1967 during the Arusha Declaration. The declaration which outlined different kind of things, including the introduction of socialism and self-reliance. Also, also it introduced ujamaa as the policy which is going to be used to develop the national economy, and also the Arusha Declaration has overhauled the national economy, has overhauled the economic system of Tanzania through what was called African socialism. My dear students, as you can see, here is Arusha, and if you go to Arusha, you're going to see this monument. And this, of course, has been built to signify or to show the Arusha Declaration. This is the symbol of Arusha Declaration, and it is found in Arusha, my dear students. And let's now look at the essence or objective or principles of Arusha Declaration. Principles of Arusha Declaration. The first principle of Arusha Declaration is to maintain the independence of this country. Arusha Declaration was introduced in order to maintain the independence of this country, to consolidate the independence of this country, as well as the freedom of its people. Why? Because, as what Mwalimu Nyerere once said, that you cannot consider yourself that you are free if you still depend on some other people for your political, social, and economic development. In the other hand, the country should have to be independent. And not depending on some other countries. That is the only way you can be free. So in order to maintain the independence of this country, then Tanzania must practice a self-reliance policy. That means they have to become independent in terms of their economy, in terms of their social services, and so on and so forth. So that is the first principle of Arusha Declaration. To maintain independence of this country, as well as the independence of the people of this country. The second principle or essence of Arusha Declaration was to safeguard the inherent dignity of the individual, according to Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Remember, here we are talking about Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this is, of course, the Geneva Convention of 1948, which came with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That means the human rights should be respected. So one among the essence of Arusha Declaration, it was to respect the dignity of human rights. In fact, Arusha Declaration has professed that all people are equal, regardless of their color, regardless of their tribe, regardless of their places of origin. So they have to be respected. So Arusha Declaration was introduced in order to restore the respect of human rights. Remember, my dear students, during colonial time, there was no respect of human rights. People, in fact, were divided according to their color, and particularly the black people, the Africans, were not respected compared to people of the other races. So one of the essence or principle of Arusha Declaration, it was to restore the dignity, the dignity of the African people. In fact, the dignity of all people, regardless of their color, their tribes, their places of origin, their religion, and so on and so forth. So that is the very important second principle of Arusha Declaration. The third principle of Arusha Declaration was to ensure that this country shall be governed by a democratic government of the people. That means this country will be governed, by a democratic government of the people. Remember, when we speak of democracy, the way it was defined by different people, including Abraham Lincoln, that is the government of the people, for the people, by the people. Then Arusha Declaration has said that it has to make sure that this country is governed by democratic socialist government of the people. That means the government which is made by the people, the government which is there to fulfill the interest of the people, and so on and so forth. That is what Arusha Declaration wanted. And so for that case, there will be election to choose leaders from the top to the bottom, and that will give the meaning of a democratic socialist government of the people, the way it was proposed by Arusha Declaration. So this is another very important essence or principle of Arusha Declaration. Another principle of Arusha Declaration, it is to cooperate with all political parties in Africa engaging in liberation movement. To cooperate with all political parties in Africa engaging in liberation movement. Remember, Tanzania, under Mwalimu Nyerere, we used to believe that Tanzania will never ever consider herself that she is independent until all African countries are independent. And that was, that's exactly what Tanzania used to believe under socialism and self-reliance, under Ujamaa policy, under Ujamaa ideology. We used to believe that this country is not independent until all African countries are independent. And so for that case, Tanzania came forward to support liberation, liberation movements which was going on all over Africa. In fact, Tanzania became a leading country in supporting liberation. And that's why Mwalimu Nyerere was the chairman of the frontline states which were supporting the liberation, movements in Southern Africa. And as you can see, this is the picture, my dear students, which shows the leaders of the frontline states, walking, just walking out, just walking after they came out from the meeting. This is Mwalimu Nyerere. Of course, there is also Samora Machel. This is Kaunda, and so on. And these were the 5 leaders of the 5 frontline states coming out from the meeting. And this is demonstrating to what extent Tanzania, in fact, came forward to support liberation movement as a way of fulfilling one of the very important principle or essence of Arusha Declaration, which, of course, as I said, they wanted to. They believe that Tanzania will not consider herself independent until all African countries are independent. Let's now go to another essence or principle of declaration, and this is to see that the government mobilizes all the resources of this country toward the elimination of poverty, ignorance, and diseases. As it was said by Mwalimu Nyerere, Tanzania, under Mwalimu Nyerere, they believe that we have got 3 enemies. We have got 3 enemies. One could call them the public enemy, number 1. They were 3. One is ignorance. And the second, of course, is disease. And the third is poverty. So these were the 3 enemies in which the government, at that time under TANU, and as it was underlined by Arusha Declaration, it vowed to fight against 3 very, very typical enemies: poverty, ignorance, and disease. Poverty, it means to help people at least to come out of poverty, to make sure that people are living the good life, to increase the standard of living of the people of Tanzania. Ignorance means that to invest more in education and make sure that Tanzania is committing much of her resources, in education by increasing the literate, like increasing the literate rate in Tanzania. And of course, in this, we shall come see later, we succeeded, because there was a time that by 90% of the Tanzanian people, they knew how to read and write. And also to eliminate disease. This is another enemy, disease. These were declared as the 3 enemies of the people in Tanzania. And so Tanzania voted to fight against these 3 enemies: poverty, ignorance, and disease. And that became one of the major principles of Arusha Declaration. Another principle of Arusha Declaration, or essence of Arusha Declaration, is that the government actively assists the formation and maintaining the cooperative union. Remember, Arusha Declaration has introduced the Ujamaa ideology. And the Ujamaa ideology, as we can say, is like a familyhood, people living together, people doing things together, and so on. So the introduction of this Ujamaa ideology, it goes together with the introduction of cooperative organizations. Remember, there were some cooperative unions which had been established long before Arusha Declaration. For instance, there was KNCU, Kilimanjaro Native Cooperative Union. This was established long time ago in 1920s. But also there was another like Bahaya Cooperative Union. There was Nyanza Cooperative Union. And so on and so forth. These were established very early before Arusha Declaration. But then the government that's why they came with this to maintain, to assist the formation and maintain. Formation for those areas which did not have the cooperative union, and maintaining for those areas which already have the cooperative unions, but they were not operating well, they have to be maintained. So this is another very important principle of Arusha Declaration, my dear students. Another thing was to see that wherever possible, the government itself directly participate in economic development of this country. Government participate in economic development. Remember, under capitalism system, the government always is rolling back. The government is not directly engaging in economic activity. Rather, economic activities are just left to the private individuals. But this is contrary. Under Arusha Declaration, which we said introduced the socialism and self-reliance, government has to actively involve itself in the economic activities, like establishing some government parastatals, also running some businesses. As you can see, because of this, there was the establishment of different trading companies, like what was called the RTC, regional trading corporations, and these were operating in every region. Also, there was the establishment of other companies, government parastatals like TANESCO, for instance, and so on and so forth. We'll also see it in detail as we proceed. So this is another very important principle of Arusha Declaration. Another principle is that government also should give equal opportunity to all, men and women, irrespective of their race, religion, or status. Government to give equal opportunity to all, men and women, irrespective of race, religion, and status. My dear students, as you can see, women in Tanzania, not only in Tanzania, we can say in Africa, women versus men. Women, of course, were disadvantaged historically because during colonial time, women were not preferred in terms of education. They were not preferred in terms of employment. So most of the women were left behind during colonial time. So Arusha Declaration, one of the things it intended to do, it was to empower women, at least to bring them to be as equal as men. So that is another very important thing which has to be done by Arusha Declaration. But not only that, there is also this question of race, religion, and status. Let's look at race. About race, remember, during colonial time, there were some social services were provided to people regarding to their races. People of a certain race were given poor quality of social services. Let's take, for instance, in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam. In Dar es Salaam, for instance, there were 3 hospitals which used to operate in Dar es Salaam. Ocean Road was in fact specified for the white people, the Europeans. And the so-called today Muhimbili, it was called Sewahaji. And that was reserved for the Indians and the Asians. But the Africans, the black people, were treated at what we call today Mnazi Mmoja. At that time, it was called Mchafukoge. So you can see, if you look at the quality of these hospitals, they were different. So during the Arusha Declaration, one of the things that government wanted to do after, as one of the principles of Arusha Declaration, it was to bring equality in the, in the provision of social services. The same applied to religion. Some people were preferred more than others because of the colonial policy. So because of Arusha Declaration, there was nationalization of all religious schools, and they were made government schools so as to provide the equality in provision of education, regardless of race, religion, and status of a person. My dear students, another thing here is to see that government eradicate all types of exploitation, intimidation, discrimination, bribery, and corruption. Among the things which were affecting African countries, it was bribery, corruption, discrimination, and most important, exploitation. Exploitation, and most of these things I've mentioned, they were inherited during colonial time. And even at the early time of independence of African countries, we did not manage to remove these things. So Arusha Declaration in Tanzania was introduced purposely in order to eliminate exploitation. Exploitation of man by man. Among the principles of TANU, and TANU during the Arusha Declaration, is that no exploitation of man by man. Also intimidation, discrimination, bribery, and corruption. All these things were to be eliminated under Arusha Declaration. My dear students, Let's look at another principle of Arusha Declaration, or essence of Arusha Declaration. Another thing is to see that government to exercise effective control over principal means of production and pursue policies which facilitate the way to collective ownership of those resources. This, of course, was implemented by the nationalization of all major means of production. At independence, major means of production were in the hands of private individuals. They were in the hands of private individuals. Here we are talking of major means of production like land, like industries, mines. We are talking of, others like banks, and so on and so forth. They were owned by private individuals. So at independence, at independence, this situation still continued until 1967. So Arusha Declaration came to put all these major means of production in the hands of government. So they were to be owned by the public. They were to be owned by the public after nationalization. So that's why you come to see that some banks were nationalized in Tanzania, and they were put under what was called the NBC in 1967, the National Bank of Commerce, after nationalizing all the private banks. That goes the same to other, other companies, and also, other companies and industries and so on. Another principle or essence of Arusha Declaration is that to see the government cooperate with other states in bringing African unity. Tanzania believed on African unity. We believe that Africa should be one. We believe about we believed about the formation of the so-called Organization of African Unity, OAU. Even though, remember, some people during those days wanted to form the so-called United States of Africa, people like Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. This is what Tanzania has dedicated, and that is one of the principles of Arusha Declaration, that to make sure that Tanzania cooperates with other states in bringing about African unity. My dear students, let's now talk about ujamaa and self-reliance ideology. After we have looked about Arusha Declaration, let's now move to ujamaa and self-reliance ideology. What does this concept ujamaa means? The concept ujamaa, which of course was introduced by Mwalimu Nyerere, it explained about the social and economic development policies in Tanzania just after it gained independence from the British in 1961. Of course, Mwalimu Nyerere had that idea, but it was formally introduced during the Arusha Declaration in 1967. What does ewedu ujamaa means? Ewedu ujamaa in Swahili, is a Swahili word which means the extended family or familyhood. Extended family or familyhood. Extended family or familyhood. What does this mean? When you say extended family or familyhood, what does it mean? It means that under ujamaa, people are regarding each other. They are regarding themselves as a family. They are regarding themselves as a family. That means you just look each other as one big family. And so that's why during that time, we used to be called ndugu. A word in ndugu, it means brother. And brother in a sense that we were all looking like brothers and sisters. So there were a kind of respect among people, which in fact its root is from Ewedi Ujamaa. And, and it's distinguished from several key characteristics. A person become a person through people. That means, and it was explained by those founding fathers of this ideology, that a person becomes a person through the people or community. You cannot consider yourself that you are a person, you are somebody, without looking back to the community that you come from. So it is you who represent the community, but also the community represents you. So for that case, my dear students, this is the way we have a word ujamaa. But also, ujamaa was an African model of development. Remember, after independence of African countries, African leaders tried to develop different kind of policies. And some of them developed policies which were the socialist policies. But the socialist policies they have developed, they were not like the one which was developed by Soviet Union. They were not like the one which was developed by China. in fact, they developed their own model of, their own model of ideology. And the ideology which they came up with, for instance, as you can see, in Tanzania, we have what was called the ujamaa and self-reliance. Ujamaa and self-reliance. This is what has been practiced in Tanzania. And in Ghana, for instance, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah introduced a brand of socialism which was called the African socialism. African socialism. But if you look in Zambia, for instance, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda introduced a kind of socialism which was called the humanism. In Uganda, Milton Obote introduced a kind of socialism which was called a common man charter. And of course, if you go to Senegal, the president of Senegal, the first president of Senegal, Léopold Sédar Senghor, introduced a policy which was called the negritude, negritude. And of course, in Libya, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi came with what was called a green book. And in that green book, he explained what he described as Islamic socialism, and so on and so forth. So African leaders of those days, they tried to develop different kind of ideology under a belief that they can develop by using the ideology of their former colonial masters. They cannot develop also by using the ideology of the ideology of the communist states of USSR and China. So they have to come and develop a kind of different ideology, which in fact differs from what has been developed in Eastern Europe and China and so on. So you can see that these were the different types of ideology developed by African countries for that case. My dear students, let's now look, what are the principles of policy of socialism? What are the principles of policy of socialism? Of course, the first principle of policy of socialism is to eradicate exploitation of man by man. Under socialism, they believe that there is no exploitation of man by man. No man is allowed to exploit another. No man is allowed to exploit another in whatever way. And so for that case, if it is production, then all people should go to produce, provided you have the you have the power to produce, provided you are able to produce. You have to go to produce. And this is what it means by no exploitation of man by man. This is the first very important principle of socialism. And remember, this is just like the principle of socialist societies in anywhere in the world, that no socialist policies in the world is allow exploitation of man by man. No man is allowed to exploit another. And so, if a person is working for you, then that person should have to be paid decently, should have to be paid well. That is one. The second is that all major means of production and exchange are to be put under the peasant and workers. All major means of production are to be put under the peasant and workers. What does this mean? It means major means of production. As I said earlier, my dear students, we are referring to banks. We are referring to industries. We are referring to mining. We are referring to land and so on and so forth. These are the major means of production. And this major means of production, and the exchange, of course, is the banks. They have to be put under the control of peasant and workers. Peasant and workers. Remember, they would have, under this principle of socialism, they would have said they have to be put under government. Under government. But then the question is, what is this government? What is this government? That's why they have to say they have to be put under peasant and workers. Remember, government is here to lead. So if you say they have to be put under government, there can be some few people who are the member of the government, maybe the top member of the government, who can say that according to this principle, we are controlling the major means of production on behalf of people. No, it has to be under peasant and workers. Because this country of Tanzania, under that policy of socialism and Arusha Declaration, it was made of two classes, the class of peasant and the class of worker. You are either a peasant or you are a workers. And that's exactly what the Arusha Declaration, that's exactly what it means by this principle of policy of socialism. My dear students, another principle of socialism is to introduce a socialist democracy. Socialist democracy. In fact, they were not suggesting for the introduction of the Western democracy. They were neither accepting the introduction of the communist democracy, which introduced the so-called vanguard party, like what happened in Soviet Union, in USSR. But what they were suggesting, is that there should be the introduction of a socialist democracy, which will be practiced according to the tradition of our people. And democracy that we have, it was to involve people in choosing leaders from the top to the bottom, from the top to the bottom. But remember, after 1967, it was not a kind of democracy that would include the multi-party system. It was democracy where people would compete within one party at that time, the party of TANU and later CCM and so on. So that is another principle. Let's go to another principle, which is said socialism is a belief. Socialism is a belief, is a way of life, and a socialist society cannot simply come into existence. Socialism is a belief that if you are really socialist, then it has to come from your heart. It has to come from your heart. Why? Because some people might preach that they are socialist in the podium, but in reality, deep down to their heart, they are not socialist. So that's why they feel socialism is a belief. So it starts from the belief. You have to believe in socialism. You have to live a way of life which is a socialist life. A socialist society cannot simply come into existence because of decree, because of the statement of the leader, and so on. No, socialism can come into existence because people believe that it's a good way to follow, it's a good way to live. And so that is the way to build a socialist society. So socialism is a belief. That's another very important principle of socialism and self-reliance. My dear students, after we have looked at the principle of socialism, policy, let's now go to economic impact of Arusha Declaration. What does Arusha Declaration had, to the Tanzanian society? The first economic impact of Arusha Declaration was the nationalization of all major means of production. My dear students, I think I've said it a lot, that the major means of production were nationalized. You are talking of bank, industries, mining, and so on. All of these were nationalized and put under the public ownership. And remember what you said earlier, that all these major means of production are going to be owned by the peasant and workers. So if the government then owned, it's on behalf of peasant and workers. So all those things were nationalized, including foreign trade and so on. So that is the one first very important economic impact of Arusha Declaration. Another economic impact of Arusha Declaration was the introduction of Ujamaa village. Ujamaa village were introduced, and this was introduced in the program which was introduced earlier, and it was called the villagealization. That means the establishment of Ujamaa village. And of course, my dear students, the aim of establishing this Ujamaa village was good, was very good. It was very good because they believed that by establishing Ujamaa village, you can be able to bring people very close to the provision of social services. For instance, if you take people who are scattered everywhere and you bring them here to live, it is very possible to build one school here, primary school, to build one secondary school. It is very simple to provide water to these people. It's very simple to provide health care to these people. It's very simple to construct a road, maybe that runs from this village to go to the to the headquarters of the district and so on. So provision of social services were expected to be very easy if people are living close to each other in one village. This is quite different and difficult if these people are scattered. One is living here, the other is living there, the other is living there. So if one wants to go to school which is here, one has to walk, let's say 5, 6, or even 10 kilometers. If one wants to have the water, it means government has to supply water to these people all the way from maybe where water is found, from the source of the water to their areas of, to their homes. So that is becoming so difficult. So what I'm trying to say here, my dear students, is the aim of establishing this village was good. However, the outcome was not good because of poor implementation, as we are going to see. So it resulted into disaster, particularly in 1973-74, when they introduced the, when they started to force people to move from their areas to go to the Ujamaa village, and that resulted to a disaster and so on. This, for instance, this, my dear students, is the example of people working together in the Ujamaa village, as you can see, in one of the places where this Ujamaa village were established in Tanzania. You see, people working together, and this is the typical implementation of Ujamaa, where people would work together in the, in the Ujamaa farms, in the village farm, and so on and so forth. This is just another example. My dear students, let's now go to another economic impact, and this is the establishment of consolidation of more establishment and the consolidation of more public enterprises. We are talking of the government parastatals. For those who were existing, they were either consolidated and other new were established. We are talking of TANESCO, TRC, Tanzania Railway Corporation. There was NPF. NPF, there was National Insurance Company, there was Tamico, and so on. So a lot of government parastatals were established, as we said earlier, that one among the very important objective of Arusha Declaration, it was to make sure that the major means of production are put in the hands of the peasant and workers. But most important also, they said they also said that they have to make sure that government involve in the economies of the country. And so they have to establish a lot of government parastatals to operate different economic sectors of the country. Another economic impact was the establishment of import substitution industries. They established some industries to reduce the importation of some of the commodities which are always used, used in the country. And some of the industries established were textile industries. A lot of textile industries were established. We are speaking of textile like Sungura textile industry. There was Musoma textile industries. There was Mwanza textile industries called the Mwatex. There was also Kilimanjaro textile industry. Later there was Urafiki textile industry, which was established as a result of cooperation between Tanzania and China and so on. So a lot of industries were established as part of establishment of import substitution industries is one among the impact of Arusha Declaration. Another economic impact was that emphasis was put on production of raw materials for domestic industrial consumption and export to earn foreign exchange. They put emphasis in production of raw materials. In fact, at that time, they came with different slogans, including kilimo cha kufa na kupona. That means agriculture is a matter of life or death. That means people have to produce a lot because we needed foreign currency. And the best way we can use to get foreign currency, it is not to borrow money from the developed countries. It is not to, it is not to ask for money from the international financial institutions, but rather we have to get foreign currency by producing cashew crops. So emphasis was put in production of cashew crops, but also we were producing raw materials to feed our industries. Remember, we spoke in the previous point that there were establishment of import substitution industries. So those industries which are being established, they needed raw materials. They were to be fed with some raw materials. For instance, cotton were needed for textile industries and so on. That's another very important point. Another economic impact is the improvement and expansion of infrastructure. Remember, Tanzania is a very large country, so you have to develop infrastructure. So one of the economic impact of declaration was the improvement of infrastructure. However, this one, to some extent, it has got some, some kind of pros and cons, because if you look at infrastructure, yes, some of the infrastructures were developed, but also at that period also we had, you could see that there were the collapse of some other infrastructures. As you can see, this is the Tanzania-Zambia Railway, TAZARA, and it runs from Dar es Salaam to Kapiri-Mposhi in Zambia, and this was built by the Chinese in 1970s to facilitate the transportation of cargoes from Dar es Salaam to Zambia, but also it helped a lot of people who live in southern part of Tanzania. My dear students, another economic impact is the consolidation of national service, JKT. National service was established in 1966, and people were told to go to national service. And one of the reasons why, it was at least to create patriotism to people, to make people feel that they are really Tanzanians. And that could be done by going to the national service. People to go to the national service and volunteer. At least they have to do something to their nation. And this is started in 1966. The program, of course, which continue, of course, till today, even though in a different way. So that we can say is one of the impact of Arusha Declaration. As you can see, these were the recruit of the national service. They are servicemen and women of the national service, and they are parading. As you can see their faces, my dear students. These people are, prepared to become the reserve army and the producers and so on. So once they finish their, their training and go back to their, to their respective homes or working place, these people expect that they are going to become the real patriot of this country. So this is also one among the very important impact of the Arusha Declaration. Let's now go to political impact of Arusha Declaration. What political impact does Arusha Declaration had to this country? The first, it was creation of one party and leadership of Chama cha Mapinduzi. There was the transformation of course, transformation was done earlier in 1965, but Arusha Declaration has cemented that transformation from multi-party system to single-party system. And it was then said that Tanzania is going to have one political party, and that political party was TANU, which was in 1977 converted to become CCM. And in 1977, the party assumed what was called the party supremacy, as it was passed to the Tanzania Permanent Constitution of 1977. Party supremacy, it means party now was leading in all affairs. It has taken a leading role in all affairs of leading the country, Tanzania. So that happened in 1977. My dear students, the second very important political impact was institutionalization of social, economic, and political equality through creation of central democracy. This is just like what we said. There was creation of central democracy. Creation of central democracy, it means that there was democracy in which people were allowed to choose leaders from the top to the bottom, from the top to the bottom. And remember, when they were abolishing multi-party system, one of the reasons which which was given is that the opposition parties were so weak. And so there was no real competition of people during elections. So they said it is better people to compete for election within that one party which is strong. So people were allowed to compete within TANU. And really at that time you could see a very stiff competition of people, during the election. My dear students, you can learn much about what I've just said about this central democracy by reading this book written by Mwalimu Nyerere called, Ujamaa, Essays on Socialism. Mwalimu Nyerere wrote this book, and so if you read this book, you can get much of what we are trying to say here. Another political impact of Arusha Declaration was the widening of democracy and decentralization process in 1972. Democracy was widened, as we have just said, but in 1972, there was what is called the decentralization. Decentralization. Decentralization means that to give more power to the regional and the local authority. To give more power to the regional and local authority. This is what is called the decentralization. That means they were trying to, move away from what is called the, centralization by giving more power to the regional and local authority. My dear students, another political impact was merging of TANU and ASP. Of course, you know that in 1977, TANU and ASP were merged and they formed the political party called the CCM. That was 1977. And of course, it came with what we call the party supremacy. My dear students, this is the picture and the names, a picture of some of the members who formed the committee, which wrote a CCM constitution in 1977. These are the names. You can read. These are the names. And also, these are the names of members from Tanzania mainland, and these are the names of members from Zanzibar. Together they wrote that constitution in 1977, which established the CCM. My dear students, let's now move to problem or challenge emanating from Arusha Declaration. What are the problems or challenges which emanate from Arusha Declaration? The first challenge was lack of enough administrative personnel. There were not enough people to, to lead. And here we are talking of administrative personnel who were qualified. That was the problem. You nationalize the industry, but unfortunately, you don't have people who are qualified enough to run those industries. So what was the consequence? It was the collapse of those industries. Another point here is the negative attitude of Ujamaa police from among the people. Some people had negative attitude toward Ujamaa. In fact, some people were preaching socialism in the podium, but when they go back during night, they were pure and typical capitalists. So you can see, as we said earlier, socialism is a belief, but this was different to some people. So negative attitude of Ujamaa police from among the people also became one of the challenge, one of the problems which faced Arusha Declaration. For instance, villageization. Some of the policies were not well, people were not well informed about socialism. Villageization was introduced, but they failed because people were not prepared for that villageization. As you can see, my dear students, this is the book which is written by Ralph Ebert. This book, of course, has explained about the villageization, why Ujamaa villages failed, why Ujamaa villages failed. It is called Ujamaa, the Hidden Story of Tanzania Socialist Village. And of course they failed, and this explains about the shortcoming of Ujamaa village. You can read this book, but you have to be careful in reading because some of these people had a lot of negativity regarding Ujamaa from the very beginning. My dear students, another challenge is the embezzlement of public funds and public enterprises. People, of course, are stealing the public funds, and that became also, one of the reasons for the the collapse of Arusha Declaration. Lack of political will among the leaders. Some leaders had no political will. This is Oscar Kambona. I don't want to say much, but but this person, Kambona, was blamed. Kambona was blamed, of course, that he was not a good socialist and so on. And this is 1966 when he was meeting, some of the. He was meeting some of the people outside, outside Kivukoni College. In 1966. Another point is lack of funds to finance some of the big projects. Of course, infrastructures, you need a lot of money. This you can see that our roads, in fact, our roads, of course, as you can see, they were very highly in a bad shape during 1970s. And because government did not have enough funds to build the new roads. Also pressure from the imperialists. Of course, we can't ignore the pressure from the imperialists. While we are trying to build socialism, while we are trying to implement Arusha Declaration, the imperialist nations, they were trying hard to make sure that our policies fail. So you can see there were some contradictions regarding these two things. They want us to fail, we want ourselves to succeed. So that probably led to the failure of the Arusha Declaration and so on. My dear students, the last challenge or problem emanating from Arusha Declaration is the poor planning and policies. It lacked priority. You are establishing an industry somewhere, but the question is, have you really put all the economic considerations before setting up that industry in a place that you want to establish? Because there are some problems. Some of the industries during those days were established by political motive. You're establishing an industry in a place which is very far from the places where raw materials are obtained. The place which has got problem of power supply, or maybe it's very far to the market, or maybe there is shortage of labor and so on. And all this led to the collapse of the industries and some other companies which have been established. So sometimes Arusha Declaration, one of the challenges it faced is because of poor planning, and the policies and so on. My dear students, let's now break for a while. We'll be back to look at the questions that I gave you during the beginning of our lesson. Welcome back, my dear students. Reflective questions. The questions that I gave you during the beginning of our lesson, and after what we have gone through, my dear students, you can now see that our questions, our questions, therefore, as you can see, they are very simple. The first question was analyze the objective of socialism and self-reliance in Tanzania. And as you can see, my students, this question is very simple because now I know and I believe that you have the answers to this question. The objective of socialism and self-reliance policy in Tanzania. Also, my dear students, we have this second question: evaluate the economic and political impact of Arusha Declaration in Tanzania. This again is another very simple question. You have economic and political impact. And remember, impact of course can be negative or positive, but we divided, in our studies we divided. We looked at economic impact and the political impact, focusing on positive. And also we had another part which is called the challenges or problem emanating from Arusha Declaration. So for that case, if you're asked a question regarding the problem emanating from Arusha Declaration or challenges emanating from Arusha Declaration, you can use the negative political and economic impact. But if the question just wants to talk about the impact, in fact, you can combine positive and negative. My dear students, with this note then, let us just come to an end of our lesson of today. And it's my hope that you can attempt these questions that I gave you, together with some other questions which might also come from not only this subtopic, but now the topic, because we have finished the discussions, we have finished lessons in our topic of the rise of socialism. My dear students, thank you very much, and goodbye. Let's meet next time.